And now we're on Daf Samach Vav Amid Beis. Mina Minala. Rava wants to find a proof text that would support his opinion that an echad is not believed in a davar shebe'erva, even if no one's makrishin. This nan we learned in a Tosefta, in Masechet Mikvos, Perik Aleph, Amar Rab Shimon, Ma'isa b'Megora. Megora is a mikvah. It was owned by someone by the name of Diskim from Yavne. We checked out the mikvah and we found that it had Arboim Sa, which is the shear for a mikvah to be kosher. So initially, when we measured out the water in this mikvah, fine, it had the shear 40 Sa. Umadadu, but after a certain period of time passed by, and many people who were Tmeim went into the mikvah, and Kalim Tmeim went into the mikvah, they went ahead and they measured the mikvah of an Imtzeis Chaser, and they found that it only has 39.9 Sa. It doesn't have 40 Sa. So what do we do now with all the taros that came in contact with the Tamei Mes who dipped himself in this mikvah? Kol atara shenasu al gavan machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. We'll see later on. Rabbi Tarfon is going to back out, but now, Rabbi Tarfon mitayev, Rabbi Akiva mitame. So you had bnei adam tmeim or kalim tmeim, and they were put into this mikvah, which initially was checked out, and it's fine, but now it's checked out, and it's not fine. And these people, or Kalim, now came in contact with taros. What's the status of the taros? Amar Rabbi Tarfon, mikveh zeh b'chezkas sholem hu omed. We know that the mikveh at one point was full, kosher, valid with 40 Sa. Umi safek atabol lachasro? Are you, Rabbi Akiva, arguing that now we're going to say that this is a puzzle of mikvah? Al techasrei umi safek. You can't change the chazaka based on a safek. The chazaka of the mikvah is that it has kashrus. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Adam zeh b'chezkas tamei omed. Wait a second. You want to say that the mikvah has a chezkas kosher, but what about the person who went into the mikvah? He was tamed. And misafek atov bola taro al tarid misafek. Now you're going to say, well, maybe the mikvah was full and mole and kosher, and therefore you want to be mitayer a tame who jumped into the mikvah. What about the cheskes tumah the gabra? Amar Rabbi Tarfon, mashal. I'm going to prove my shita through a mashal. Okay, we have to add the word kohen. Le kohen ha'omed u'makriv al gabi mizbeach nodalo shu ben grusha ben chalutza shavodasa kshera. A man is being makriv as a kohen on the mizbeach korbanos. Now he finds out that he's a ben grush ben chalutz. He's possible for avodah beis hamikdash. His avodah is kshera. We're not going to passel his avodah retroactively. And here also, we're not going to assume that the mikvah was chaser retroactively. I'm going to give you a different mashal, which is more accurate in its description of our issue, of the mikveh that now is found to be chaser. The Kohen is serving on the mizbeach. We know that now they find out shu bal mum. A bal mum is possibly avoda. His avoda is psula. Here also, in the case of mikveh, we're finding out that the mikveh is chaser. It's like a Kohen who does the avoda, we find out he's a bal mum. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, atadi misal balmum, maniti misal ben grush bechalitza. You made an equation between our case of the mikveh that now is chaser and a person who finds out that he's a balmum. I made a comparison to a person, a Kohen, who finds out that he's been grusha. Nira, let's check it out. I'm putting all my cards on the table, says Rabbi Tarfon. Lemi doma. The case of a person who's tovel the mikveh and the status of the mikveh is questionable. Idoma ben grusha ben chalutza nidunenu ki ben grusha o ki ben chalutza. V'im doma lebalmum nidunenu lebalmum. And basically, what Rabbi Tarfon is saying to Rabbi Akiva is that if your analogy is better than mine, and you compare him to a person who finds out to be a balmum, then you know what? I'm going to throw in the towel, and I'm going to embrace your shita and rescind my position. Hischil Rabbi Akiva Ladun. Rabbi Akiva wants to explain why the case of a mikveh that was checked out to be and found to be chaser is similar to a Kohen who was checked out and found to be a balmum. Mikveh psulo bi yachid, ubalmum psulo bi yachid. Rabbi Akiva says the following. We have a principle called Eid Echad Nem Bisurin. The question of whether the mikveh has a status of kosher and mole or chaser is a question of isurim, and Eid Echad is believed. So too, a balmum, a Kohen who's subject to the testimony of Eid Echad, who says he's a balmum, we should believe him. And his avodah is psula. It sounds like Rabbi Akiva is saying that a balmum is a davish be'isur, and therefore Eid Echad is nema. The al yochia ben grushma chalutza shepsula b'shnayim. In order to passel a Kohen as a ben grusha chalutza, we require a minimum of 2 eidim. So in 2 different cases, says Rabbi Akiva, which are parallel and should be compared one to the other, we're talking about a psul that is established by Eid Echad. Whether it's the Eid Echad in the case of a mikvah, is a davish b'isur, or whether it's Eid Echad in a balmum that establishes that this Kohen can no longer do the avodah, or maybe could never have done the avodah, and that's also Eid Echad and Bisur. But don't compare it to a Ben Gushim and Chalutza, which requires 2 eidim. Dovar Acher, Rabbi Akiva adds another piece to the puzzle. That mikvah psula begufa, balmum psula begufa, val yochia ben grusha bechalutza shepsula me'acheret. So in the case of ben grusha ben chalutza, the psul starts with his mother, who will, in an illegitimate marriage, married someone, and as a result of the marriage became a psul kuhuna. But in the cases of mikvah and balmum, the psul is begufa. One of his avarim is pagum, so he's a balmum. Or the mikvah has less than 40 sa. So the mum and the chisaron in the mikvah are inherent rather than being external, like the case of Ben Grusha Mechalutza, which is a result of the mother's marriage. So that Rabbi Tarfon conceded the truth is in Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had logically proven his point, and his analogy is correct. And Rava explains Rabbi Akiva. Hai balmum shepsulo b'eid echad, b'eid yochid, one eid. Hechi dami. What's the case? Either if the Kohen is denying the testimony of the eid echad, and he's saying he's not a balmum, mimehemen, would the aid be posel lakuna, never to be posel? He's an aid mukhash. We've established eid echad b'choshel av klum. Ella, but it must be the shosik. The Kohen said nothing in response to the testimony of Rabbi Akiva that he's balmum. And so too in the case of ben Grusha and Chalutza, which Rabbi Akiva compared ben Grusha and Chalutza to these dinim. And the shosik, the Kohen, when they testified against him that he's a ben Grusha and Chalutza, he said nothing. And nevertheless, Katani, it says in the Brisa that mikvah psula b'yachid u'ba'almum psula b'yachid al yochichu ben Grusha and Chalutza shepsula b'shnayim. Says Rava, you see clearly that it's a davar shebe'erva and it requires two eidim. Is therefore eid echad is not believed, and he would not be believed to testify on a Kohen that he's a cholol. And even if the Kohen is shosek and he's not makish, the eid echad is not believed. So again, according to Rava, why is he believed in the cases of mikvah and balmum? Because that's isurim. And with regard to isurim, eid echad and isurim, as long as there's no akasha. But with regard to ben Grusha and Chalutza, that's not isurim. That doesn't come under eid echad and isurim. That's a davar shebe'erva, and therefore we need shnai. For Abaye, how does Abaye reject the proof of Rava? Amar liolam chamachishle. Rabbi Akiva is talking about a situation in which the Kohen was machish the aid who testified against him that he's a ben Grusha. Umi deka amrit. And now, according to what you said, that he's machish him. So even if he testifies that he's a balmum, amay mehemna, this eid echad b'chosha, that's Abay's kasha. And the Gemara answers the Amar le shalach achle. Shalach means take off your garments. Achle, and I'll point to the fact that you're a balmum if you're going to be machish. So since it's edus efshel ligluye me'okamachu, we could be mavar whether the aid is telling the truth or not. We believe the aid. He would not lie, knowing full well that in 2 minutes' time they're going to prove that he's lying. So Abai says that according to this, Hainu diktani, that will give us an insight into Rabbi Akiva's argument when he compared the two cases. Mikveh psula begufo, ubalmum psula begufo. Why does eid echad have nemanis in the case of mikvah or in the case of balmum? Says Rabbi Akiva, because in both these cases they could be mavar the psul. By checking out the mikvah or by checking out the body of the Kohen. Here there's no way you can prove that he is a ben Grusha ben Chalutza. Now the Gemara wants to know what's the deal if a ben Grusha ben Chalutza Kohen does the avoda. We thought he was kosher. We find out he's possible. And the law is that his avoda b'diavad is kosher. Ben Grusha, ben Grusha ben Chalutza, the avodah kshera minolan. I mean, after all, if he's a Ben Gushim Chalutza, then Lechore's avoda should certainly be psula. Rabbi Yudam Shmuel, and here we have a whole list of drushes. The Amakra, that it says in the pasuk regarding Pinchas, "V'hoisa lo lezaro achra bris kunas olon." And what do we dash for the word zaro? Bein zera kosher, bein zera pasul. And it says bris kunas olam. It means that the Eved, his avodah is kshera. Avodah Shmuel Amar, he has a different source. Meihacha from a pasuk in Dvarim Lamed Gimel with regard to Shevet Levi. Barech Hashem chelo ufaal yadav tirtzeh in Zos HaBrocha. And from the language chelo, we learn afilu chulin shebal tirtzeh. Meaning, even if a Kohen Cholol did the avoda, and now the avoda should be chulin, nevertheless, tirtzeh, the Torah guarantees a ritzui on the korban. Now, a third limud, Rav Yani Omer Mihach, ubas alakone sheyeh bayomahem. Right in Parshas Shoftim it says, "V'chi talal daitcha sh'adam holech etzel Kohen shelo hoya biyamav." What does it mean, the Kohen who was there and alive in your generation? What, are we going to go to a Kohen who lived in an earlier generation? Ella zeh kosher v'nischala. This is a person who had a chazaka. The Kohen had a chazaka. He's kosher. He did the avoda, and then nischala means we found out that he was a chol. So since he did the avoda, and at that moment he did the avoda, he had a cheskas kashrus l'kuhuna. Therefore, even though later on we find out he was a cholol, we could be machshir his avoda. Ubalmum, let's say Balmum does the avoda. He didn't realize he's excluded from the avoda. He did it b'shogeg. Is the avodah psula minolan? How do we know that when we find out he's a Balmum, all his avodah that he did is pasul mafreya? Rabbi Yudam Shmuel, pasuk says, "V'hoisa lo lazaro." And right before that pasuk, Omar Kro, it says, "L'chein emar hinino sein lo esprisi shalom." And we're going to dash in the word shalom, that it comes from the shorish shleimut, and the bris kahuna that was given to him in his zera is kshu shalom v'lo kshu chassid. It's only when his evarim are intact and not if he's missing. So Gemara asks for shalom ksiv. It doesn't say shalem, indicating that his body is totally whole. Rav Nachman vav de shalom k'tiyahi. In our Mesorah, the vav in the word shalom is a small vav, and that's a remez to dash in this world as if it said shalem without a vav, to teach us that this parsha is only referring to shleimim, and only shleimim are ksherim lakuna. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Samach Amud Beis. And we're getting into Yuchsel. Kol makom sheish Kiddushin ein avera v'ein avera is avlad holich achar zocha. So if you have a marriage that's legitimate, and the man had every right in the world to marry this woman, and the vlad is achar zocha. Let's say a Kohen gets married to a Levia, the child will be a Kohen. Ve'ezozu zo Kohenis Levia v'Yisraelis shenisu leKohen Levi v'Yisrael. So either a Kohenis or Levi or Yisraelis got married to a Kohen or Levi or Yisrael. And the Torah says l'mishpachos sam lebeis avos sam, which means that the yichus goes lebeis avos to the father. So if the father's a Levi and the mother is a Kohenes, the child will be a Levi. Even though the status of a person as Jewish or not Jewish depends on the yichus of the mother, but as far as Kahuna and Levi are concerned, it depends upon the father. Next, Kol makom sheyesh kiddushin v'yesh avera. The marriage was illegitimate. Hakol havlad holich achar pogum. Ezazu almana, who is psula, and she's not allowed to marry to a Kohen Gadol, and she married a Kohen Gadol. So the vlad is going to be like the psul, and in this case, the psul is the almana because she's psula for Kohen Gadol. O grusha v'chalutza l'Kohen hejot. So she's a grusha chalutza. She is excluded from marrying a Kohen, and this is going to be a case of yesh kiddushin because it's only chayve lavim, and there is tfisas kiddushin chayve lavim, but yesh avera because a Kohen is not allowed to marry ben grusha v'chalutza, and the psul of the ben grusha chalutza will now be passed on to the child. O mamzeres. If anyone marries a mamzeres, then the child is going to be a mamzer. Nesina, anyone marries a nesina, the child is going to be a mamzer. These are the givonim that had a so-called gerus. Li Yisrael, if the mamzer is married to Yisrael, or bas Yisrael, la mamzer, in all these cases, the child goes after the pogum, and the child will be a mamzer like the pogum. In this case, the mamzeres, like the mother. Now we get to the third category. Kol misha ein lo alav kiddushin. There's no tfis kiddushin at all. Aval yesh lo ala cherem kiddushin. Anyone else could be married to her. Havlad mamzer. So that if you have a relationship, a union between a man and a woman, which is chayve krisus or chayve misus bezdin, which means that there's no tfisas kiddushin, he couldn't have married her legally, then the child is a mamzer. We'll soon see the case of law al acherim, but now we're talking about it yesh al acherim. Next, the fourth klal. Kol misha ein lo olav lo alacherem kiddushin. A man has a relationship with a woman, and no one could have kiddushin with this woman. Havlad kemosa, the vlad has the status of the mother. Ezu zeh, vlad shivcha. So the Boel had a relationship with a Shivcha Knanis, and that's Ein La Nisuin Klal, not to this Boel and not to any other man. Bin Nachris, and let's say a Yisrael had a relationship with a non-Jewish woman, and once again, there's no Tfisas Kiddushin for anybody. Then the vlad is miyuchas to the mother, which means that if the mother says shivcha, and he's a male, he's an Eved Knani. If she's a goya, then he's a goy. All like the mother. Now, if somebody gives a get shivcha to the shivcha, or if there was gerus, that's a different story. Then it's heter b'Yisrael. Gemara says, "Kol makom sheish kiddushin v'yein avera havlad olech achal zochros." The Gemara asks, "Amalei Reb Shimon Reb Yochanan klolahu." Are you telling me that whenever there is a valid kiddushin, then the vlad gets the same status as the father? That's not true. And here we turn to the Daf Samach Zayin. Ger shenosa mamzeres. Right now, the Gemara assumes that a ger is allowed to marry mamzeres, which will explain why. The yesh kiddushin, so there's no hafkas or eat feces kiddushin. Vienna Vera, and yet Avlad Olech Achar Pogum, Desanya Gersh and Osam Mamzeres, Avlad Mamzer, Div Rabbi Yossi. So we see that the Vlad is a Mamzer according to Rabbi Yossi, despite the fact that there was no Avera in the marriage, because a Ger is allowed to marry a Mamzeres. So it's Yesh Kiddushin Vein Avera. There's Tfisis Kiddushin, and there's no Avera, and yet the Vlad is a Mamzer. You just told me that if it's Yesh Kiddushin Vein Avera, then the Vlad goes after the father. And the father's a ger, he's not a mamzer. Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan responds to Rabbi Shimon, Mi Savris Masnisa Rabbi Yossi, he Masnisa Rabbi Yehudi. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda were at loggerheads about the case of a ger, can he marry a mamzeres? And we'll explain the machloks in a second. Tiyama Rabbi Yehuda said, ger lo yisa mamzeres. So therefore it's Kiddushin, but Yesh Avera, and we apply the klal of the Mishnah Kol Holech Achar Avlad Holech Achar Pogum. What's the machlokas here between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda? The question is how to define Kahal Gerim. Because the Torah says with regard to Mamzer Lo Yavo, Mamzer B'Kal Hashem. Rabbi Yossi says that Kahal Gerim Einom Kol, and therefore they are not excluded because the Torah excludes only Kol. And therefore, a ger is allowed to marry mamzeres. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds no, that kahal gerim is a kol, and therefore they're included in lo yovo mamzer b'kal Hashem, and therefore a ger cannot marry a mamzeres. All right, so we'll stop here on Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph with the word nisniyeh. And I'll wish you great hatzlacha tomorrow. And if it's Hashem, we'll get together on Yom Shishi.